My wife and I are beside ourselves right now. This is the type of thing you see in the movies, but now it's happening to us. Yesterday evening, a little after 6, my wife and I were in the kitchen cooking dinner when my 6-year-old, almost 7 son, Kyle, walked in from the back patio. He was holding a folded piece of paper in his hand and had a strange look on his face. My son's constantly drawing and loves to read and write, so this usually wouldn't have stood out to me at all, but he'd just come in from hitting the baseball off the tee and really had no reason to be holding a piece of paper. My son's the type of kid who wears his emotions on his sleeve. When I asked to see the piece of paper, I could tell he didn't really want to give it to me because he flashed his typical, "I'm gonna be in trouble if I do" face. I insisted and he finally handed it over. Here's what it said. Dear Kyle, I know this note may sound scary, your daddy will think it is, but grown-ups don't know how friendships can grow when kids are just left to be kids. And what a kid you've become, Kyle. You're growing as fast as a weed. Last night off the tee, you stroked it for 3 and your team won a 2-run lead. Yes, I've been watching a while now, it's true. I think we would make perfect friends. You're a kid through and through, and I am one too, even if just for pretends. The problem I fear is your parents. I doubt they would let us hang out. One is just rude, the other a prude, church-going, pure, holy, devout. I've got an idea. Can you tell my hands shaking? For me and you getting together? Tomorrow at 3, you can come and see me at the address attached to this letter. But please, pretty please, don't tell your dad. Your mom and he won't understand. Just come by yourself. I'll be dressed as an elf, and we can even hold hands. Would you like that? You will. You really will, Kyle. We will have, my oh my, so much fun. So I'll see you at 3 by the sycamore tree, where our 2 kindred souls become one. There was an address scribbled at the bottom of the page. 3 orange circle. I knew immediately it wasn't a prank. Carrie, my wife, is the youth group leader at our church, and Kyle did just have a t-ball game there last night. Orange Circle is only 1 street over from our street, and I'm pretty sure Lot 3 is the corner lot in the cul-de-sac, which has an empty house with a large sycamore tree in the backyard. Was this sicko really watching Kyle's game? What would have happened if I hadn't seen him with the letter? I shouted for my wife to come read it. When she did, she flipped out and ran for the phone to call the police. I flipped the note over, and on the back was some more text. I couldn't read it at first, but quickly realized it was written backwards, so I'm guessing Kyle couldn't have read it. To read it, I had to hold it up in front of a mirror. And now, just in case, if your dad's reading this, it's time to tell him a story. If your mom flaps her hole, or your dad tells a soul, I'm afraid things might get rather gory. On the 10th of July, 1995, a woman named Susie went missing. Susie, you see, unlike you and me, wasn't careful about who she'd been kissing. I kept her a while, but old things get so boring, and in my time I'd gotten my fill. I threw her away, and to my great dismay, the hunger I felt plagued me still. I tried to bury it deep down inside, where nothing down there can escape. But lately it seems I see Kyle in my dreams, and that hunger can no longer hide. Now that you know what I'm capable of, more than both of you can comprehend. If one word is spoken, then children get broken, and Susie will have a new friend. The police arrived in half an hour, and we showed them the note. They told us to stay inside and lock the doors for the remainder of the night. The man had obviously been in our fenced-in backyard, which made me sick to my stomach and had me cursing myself for not installing the security camera I'd gotten for Christmas. Nothing happened last night, thank God. This morning I got a call from the detective assigned to our case. He'd reviewed the list of missing person cases from 1995, and something had turned up. Suzanne Carrington went missing July 10th, 1995, just as the note said. The last person to see her alive was a friend who saw her at the 24-hour gym they attended together. Susie had said she'd met someone new and wanted to get a quick workout in before getting ready for their second date. Susie was never seen again, and the man was never identified. And maybe the worst part was Suzanne's address, 3 Orange Circle. I found the first floater when I was 7 years old. It had washed up on the shore about 100 yards from my family's summer house. It still looked mostly human, a bit swollen and decomposed, but whole enough for me to immediately recognize what it was. Even as a kid, I was never very squeamish. I used to watch my father skin the deer he caught on his hunting trips, and I would clean my own fish whenever I reeled one in from the salty lake. Finding a human body was the best thing that could ever happen to me that summer. I thought about telling my parents, but there's no way they'd let me play with it. Heck, they might even ban me from going down to the water at all, a thought which my 7-year-old brain equated to nuclear holocaust, an asteroid destroying the Earth, or other disasters of similar magnitude. So I did what any clear-thinking 7-year-old would do. I gathered up all the other kids I knew and charged them $5 each to poke it with a stick. The salt water preserved it well enough for us to stomach the smell, but poking it would release some of the bloated gas still trapped in the carcass. I told them they could have their money back if they could lick it without throwing up. No one got their money back. I made $60 before one of the little snitches told his mother and she called the police. Next summer when I came back, the first thing I did was race back to the same spot. Sure enough, there'd been 2 more bodies to wash up over the winter. These must have been sitting out in the sun for a while though, because I couldn't even get close to them. My father had followed me that time, and I wasn't allowed to have any fun. The police said these bodies must be new, since they would have been completely rotten if they'd been down there for a year. Over the next 10 years, there had been another 3 bodies found beside the lake. Each was slightly more decomposed than the last, but the police still insisted they had to be separate incidents because they were all still too fresh. None of them could be identified, and as they didn't fit any missing persons within the entire state, the police had no leads to discover who was dumping the bodies. They'd given up, but I was never able to put the mystery out of my mind. I had my own theory. I decided those people didn't just die in the lake, they lived in it too. I thought that when they die, they float to the surface just like when humans die, and they're buried in the ground. In retrospect, the idea didn't really make sense, but it had started forming when I was so young that I refused to let go until the mystery had been solved. When I was in college, I became scuba certified for the sole purpose of finding where those bodies were coming from. I rented my own equipment and went back to that lake the summer of my freshman year. The water was incredibly buoyant from all the salt, and it took almost 20 pounds of weights before I could finally sink to the floor. It was slow progress, working my way through the lake, 6 separate dives before I found what I didn't even know what I was looking for. A sunken plane. I don't know how long it had been down there, but it looked rusted as shit. One of the doors had completely rusted off, and I was able to enter and look around. There were 2 more bodies inside, no more than skeletons now. The inside of the plane was compartmentalized, almost like it was broken into sealed jail cells. The locks on some of the cells had long since rusted open, so I'm guessing those are where the floaters came from. If they were in their own pressurized air chambers, then that explains how they were preserved for so long. As the plane deteriorated, they must have broken free and floated to the surface one by one. My most important discovery was the black box, although it was painted bright orange, so it's a pretty stupid name. I brought it back with me and swam to the surface to research my findings. The plane was a Douglas C-47, which was used for military transport during World War II. They were still being used for decades afterwards, though. Some remained operational even up to 2012, so I don't know how long it's been there. The flight data recorder had been completely deteriorated, but the cockpit voice recorder still had some salvageable tape. Most of it was fuzzy or jumpy, but here's what I have. 164, Roger, something I couldn't make out. Unable to make out your last message. Please repeat. It's out. Repeat. One of them has gotten out. Has the cockpit been compromised? Negative. Cell block is... Couldn't hear. Please repeat, Captain. Report. Cell block is compromised. It's letting the others out. Fucking Christ. Remain calm, Captain. Can you neutralize the test subject? Not without compromising cockpit. How far am I from the landing field? Something unintelligible. What the fuck is that supposed to mean? Something unintelligible. Not granted permission to land. Well, then what the fuck am I supposed to do? Something. Mission terminated. Thank you for your service, Captain. My service ain't over till I bring this bird down. You're ordered to force collision. Test subjects must not escape. Like hell I am. I'm bringing her down in some water now. Request rescue operations. Mission terminated. Rescue operation denied. After that, all I could hear was engine sounds. It went on for about 5 minutes, and I was about to stop listening when I heard something like a snarling tiger. I guess I haven't changed that much since I was a kid, because I still don't want to bring this into the police. I've got another dive planned next week, and I'm going to try to break open the remaining cell blocks to get a look inside. Working on the construction field is tough. Working on the construction field as a female, 5'2", and with a master's in civil engineering? Good luck with that. I'd know, and I quite understand. The fresh graduate with the fancy degree is a threat to their job security, and to have to answer to a woman of all things in the burliest, manliest construction world? Unthinkable. But I had to start somewhere. So when I had to bring them coffee, I brought them coffee. When they asked me to write their reports, I did so with flourish. When they had an urgent meeting and had to be someplace else, I worked double, triple shifts to cover for them. I figured to rise up in this world, you can never afford to be picky. Unclog a septic tank? Count me in. Enter a boiler room? My pleasure. Countercheck the sewage with its as-built plan? Just my kind of Tuesday. I did any and all possible jobs that my work required of me. The higher-ups delegated them, and whatever ended up in my table, I accomplished to the best of my ability. All of them. Just to prove myself equal. That whatever they can do, I can too. But there's just one thing I'll never do. enter a crawlspace again. I'd moved up in the construction field and was headhunted by a project commissioning team. Now, to put it simply, whether the project be a power plant, a hospital, or a building, it generally involves 3 stages: construction, commissioning, and energizing. The commissioning team is responsible for counter-checking everything, from the structural integrity of the foundations to the sensory sensitivity of the fire detection alarms. When the commissioning team gives it an A-OK, that's the only time when the infrastructure could be energized and actively connected to its utility sources, electricity, gas, water, etc. That specific project was a high-rise residential building, 80 floors condominium style. My team was contracted to finish commissioning, and the schedule was pretty tight. For the building administrators, it meant saving time and money, but for us, this meant round-the-clock shifting. I was called in that day at precisely 1 p.m. The breaker's been tripping, and my technicians couldn't figure out why. The building's automated electromechanical system traced the fault to the building's basement. Could have been a grounded wire or something. "Send Faiz," I said, wiping the sweat off my brow. That day had been particularly hot, almost reaching over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. "His wife's going in labor right now, ma'am," replied the intern employee. I could not for the life of me recall that boy's name. "Oh, right," I remember saying, as I was distracted in recalling who was supposed to be in shift today. It would have been. And Kurt? "The electricians are way up on the 54th floor, ma'am." My temples throbbed at the thought of delaying the project any further. We'd already been pressured as it is. "Fine," I sighed. "I'll check the basement myself. Who else is here? Who's available?" "Well, there's you, ma'am," the intern said. "And Asutosh," he added as an afterthought. I groaned inwardly as I made my way to the underground basement. The Nepalese HVAC specialist sat waiting for me in a desolate basement. Of all people, I thought as I approached the claustrophobic man. He waved good-naturedly in my direction as he saw me nearing. "Come join me," I offered jokingly. He laughed as he said, "Only if you want to drag my passed-out body in and out of that hole, ma'am." He nodded toward the crude opening in the wall. "How deep?" I tried peeking in, shoved my torchlight and all. Beam couldn't reach anything. "Might be a long crawl, ma'am, I'm sorry." I sighed yet again as I steeled myself for what I was about to do. "Don't worry, it's nothing I haven't done before." The crawl space was scarcely a foot in height. The squarish opening was just enough to squeeze my tiny frame into. The hot breath of the earth and ground greeted my face as I eased myself into the crawl space. I could barely lift my stomach a few inches off the ground without having my back scraping the underneath of the floor above. The place smelled funky, like that foul scent old refrigerators produce when left out power too long. The rough ground scraped against my elbows and hands as I pressed onward. I held the torchlight with my teeth and found myself staring into an endless expanse of the narrow field of earth, courtesy of the flooring hanging over my head. I could make out the huge pillars every now and then in the dense darkness and pretty much nothing else. I was so engrossed in trying to figure out where that faulty ground may be that I jumped and made a noise like a dog being run over when I felt a hand enclose around my right ankle. "God damn it, Asutosh!" I screamed as I tenderly massaged the top of my head. The collision with the flooring overhead sent throbbing tremors of pain. I had to grip my teeth as the man crawled to a halt beside me. "Next time you do that." "I'm very sorry, ma'am," he said quickly. He swallowed as he stared around at the darkness before us. "What are you even doing here?" I asked, eyeing his pasty face and the beads of sweat on his forehead. "You're claustrophobic. Go back." "No, I can't leave you alone here, ma'am," he said, closing his eyes as he attempted to steady his shallow breathing. "I can do this on my own, thanks," I said irritably as I pressed on. I found myself yet again halted as Asutosh placed a hand on my shoulder to stop my progress. "What?" Wordlessly, he procured a chain and held it out to me. Not just any chain. It was almost 8 feet long, heavily rusted, and is made up of interlocking links almost an inch in diameter. Yep, that's one gargantuan chain. "What the actual fuck, Asutosh? Are you high right now?" He was in terrible discomfort. I could see it. I took the chain from him, heavy as it was, and nudged him backwards. "Never mind, go back," I said, making a mental note to reprimand the man the minute I get back. He shuddered as he scrunched his eyes close a little tighter. "Can I not persuade you to come back, ma'am?" "What is this all of a sudden? Am I needed above ground?" I asked, torn between irritation and concern. "No, ma'am, it's just that—" Asutosh hesitated. He took another gulp of breath as he continued. "When you entered earlier, something followed you in." I pressed forward, flinging the heavy chain out in front of me as I did so. The metal clattered noisily against the uneven ground as its weight carried itself further out. "The noise scares them off. My family believes this," Asutosh had said. "Just let its noise ring out every few feet or so. Please, ma'am." I must admit, I was scared. Asutosh wasn't the man who joked around. He was weird, awkward maybe, but he never joked around. But there was a job to be done, and I'm not about to let a something get in the way of that. But that was easier said than done. I chucked the chain out again when I reached it, grunting from the effort it required of me. The tiny space was suffocating. I had barely enough room to breathe, much less to throw a giant chain around. I've sweated through my shirt. The crawl space was impossibly hot and humid. My jaw was starting to feel numb from biting the torchlight aloft, and yet no end to the crawl space was in sight. It was pretty dumb of me not to bring any blueprint of the as-built plan of the basement, I realized. I mean, how could a crawl space even be so huge? I chanced to peek backwards and had to contain a gasp as I realized I was too far from the crawl space opening. I couldn't see it now. I took slow, deep breaths to try and calm myself. It was now just me, sandwiched between the flooring and the earth in the dense darkness in all directions. I could feel my extremities contracting, pulling me into one tight ball, my instincts warning me that to venture out any further would be foolish. And yet if I don't move, would it be any better? The heat had become soporific. Even the torchlight's unusually strong beam in the backdrop of the darkness was dizzying. Am I having a claustrophobic attack? Am I claustrophobic? Who knew? I crawled on and on. Almost ritualistically, I threw the chain before me, heard the clatter of each sound in the space, and crawled on until I saw the chains again. Chains, noise, crawl. Chains, noise, crawl. I routinely stopped to get a sense of where I am, looking up into the floorings, tracing pipes and fittings in my mind. Chains, noise, crawl. Chains, noise, crawl. My shoulders and legs had become stiff, my neck's creaking with weird noises. I was so thirsty. Could it be possible that it was hotter here than it was outside? The dense darkness made it almost impossible to tell what the time was. I went in around 1 p.m., I knew that, but how long have I been here? Chains, noise, crawl. Chains, noise, crawl. The air had become so thin I had trouble breathing. It was like I was being exposed atop a boiling kettle. The heat was draining, consuming. I was about to nod off to sleep when the torchlight began flickering. My body jerked as if it was electrocuted. No. If the torchlight failed. In that split second, my body instinctively pulled itself backwards to where I came. It did not matter that I couldn't see. All I knew was that safety was behind me. The torchlight was flickering more frequently, and I craned my neck around every which way possible to see if I was closer to my exit. I wish I hadn't. Whenever the dying beam of my torchlight fell, I saw something. It was crawling. I was whimpering and shaking and crying all at the same time. All fatigue and pain forgotten, I went crawling backwards as steadily as I can, wishing, praying for that merciful square of light in this perpetual dark. How could I have been so foolish? Then I halted to a stop. Not because the torchlight finally went out, no. I was plunged in eternal darkness, sandwiched between the cold flooring and the hot earth and ground, wishing to be a part of either, because in the space between, the space where I was suspended, I most definitely am not alone. My right foot came in contact with something liquid and warm. I felt a drip on that naked flesh between my sock and pants. The smell was putrid, like a sewage leaked through the entire space, but I knew I was nowhere near the sewage pipes. The whimper that escaped my lips turned to a scream. "Let me out of here, please, anyone!" I dove forwards into the darkness, crawling my way from whatever it was. I felt hot and sticky from all the tears and dust I'd crawled on, constantly screaming at the top of my voice. "Let me out of here, please, anyone!" I could feel cuts in my fingers and elbows and knees, but I pressed on. Towards what? I don't know. Away from what? I'd rather not know either. "Let me out of here, please, anyone!" I was gasping for breath. I was exhausted and thirsty, so very thirsty. My head began to spin. "Let me out of here, please, anyone!" I froze. Someone was screaming. A girl. And it wasn't me. No, anyone! Help! Please, anyone! I was trembling, shaking. Something was playing with me. In the darkness, I jumped again as I heard the ringtone. My phone. How could I have forgotten it? I did not even stop to look at the caller ID. "Ma'am," came Asutash's frantic voice. "Ma'am, where are you? Pull me out of here, Asutash. Pull me out." I was bawling, tears and snot and saliva streaming down my face. "Get somebody to get me out, please. You've been gone 6 hours. Something's in here with me, Asutash. My torchlight's out and I've been wandering back and forth and..." I whimpered towards the speaker, finding myself suddenly whispering. I was so scared. I had to talk, but what if it hears me? And yet I've been screaming all this time. "Ma'am, do you still have the chains?" The momentary silence from my end was all it took. "You have to find it, ma'am." That order spurred me forwards. I wasn't lost. I had an objective. I just have to accomplish one more task. I grunted as I pulled myself forwards, this time a little more sluggishly, with an arm occupied by my phone. "Keep talking to me, Asutash. Please, I beg you," I whispered. "Just get to the chains, ma'am," he said, panting as if he was running. "I'm on my way now with a few techs. We're coming to get you." That alone renewed my resolve. I kept pressing on forwards with the limited lighting of my screen and my phone can provide. I crawled and crawled, ignoring the cuts in my wrists and knees and the bumps on the back of my head. After what seemed like hours, I reached the end of the gargantuan chain. My bloodied fingers fumbled and mounted themselves on the rusted surface. I clung to it. It was my lifeline, my ticket out of this cramped place. But I wasn't the first to it. My heart was beating in my ears. The cold that swept over my body was unnatural. I couldn't dare breathe as I looked at her. Her outstretched, pale, grayish hand was clutching the other end of the chain. She was lying on the ground, almost a mirror image of me, and she stared into me with blank, white eyes. I was paralyzed on the spot. Asatosh was still speaking from the phone on my hand, but I couldn't hear it. All there was the looming darkness, and the face of the girl in front of me. And then she began to crawl forwards. I screamed as I have never screamed before. Every particle, every fiber of my being shriveled in sheer horror as the woman put one hand in front of the other, pulling herself forwards, closing the distance between us. She made no noise. She just crawled. I let go of the chain and instinctively covered my head with my arms. That was all I knew. It took me a month to recover in the hospital. They said I was in a coma for the first week. That day I was extracted out of that crawl space after I had been noted missing for 6 hours. The extraction took almost 2 hours. They had to bore a hole through the first floor to get me. My asphyxiation in that enclosed space was their concern, and the fastest way to get me out was from above. I pleaded not to make a big deal out of it. Stress over deadlines, the heat, and undiagnosed claustrophobia. Surely that was all the explanation everyone needed. Not the fact that, as Asatosh had revealed to me later on, according to police records years before, a girl was found dead in the lot where the building stood now. That the girl was mistakenly buried alive after she was raped by construction workers. That she died of asphyxiation as she fought to get out. No one else needed to know. The project commissioning went on with no further hitch, but I still recall that building to this day and hope that the girl, whoever she was, finally found her way out.